Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about how you can perform a pre-ride safety check for safety and performance. This whole thing came about because on a recent trip to Central Florida, I had a little bit of a difficulty on one of the legendary climbs, and I couldn't quite figure out why. It took me completing the ride, getting back to my car, to assess everything, to realize that I had the dreaded brake rub. Yeah, that was an easy one, but I'm going to talk to you about some other things that can actually catch you out. Sometimes silly things can catch us out in terms of performance. Other times they can catch us out in terms of safety. We're going to talk about how to deal with both of those. All right, let's go.
Okay, before we jump in, I'm going to take care of a little bit of channel biz. And what I'm going to do in this video, since I'm going to cover a number of different things, is I'll stick chapters in this so that you can just skip to the section that's of interest to you. On a recent video that I did about being able to look back effectively without coming off your line, I got a lot of comments by people saying, why don't you just use mirrors or the radar? And while I think that those aids are great as a supplement in helping you to get a picture of what's going on behind you, I still think it's important for you to learn how to look back effectively. To me, there's no substitute for using your eyeballs to get a full picture of what's going on behind you. So yeah, you can do both. All right, so let's jump into this. What I'm gonna actually talk to you about today is I'm gonna talk to you about things that you need to check on your bike before every single ride. I'm also going to talk to you about things that you should check every 1 to 2 weeks. And then I'll talk to you about the things that you should check on your bike at least monthly, just to make sure that your equipment is tip top. It doesn't mean that you have to fix this stuff, but I think it's important for you to know what's going on with your machine. So we're going to talk about how to identify those potential problem areas. Now, in my defense, on the ride up to Central Florida, it's not that I neglected my basic bike maintenance, is that my rear brake, the spring on my direct mount brake, was actually malfunctioning to the point where once I applied my rear brake aggressively, the spring did not return the brake. It ended up in a cockeyed position, and I ended up having a rub master more than anything else. So we're going to begin this by talking about the things that you need to check on your bike before every single ride. You need to make sure that your tires are tip-top, and you also need to make sure that your chain is tip-top. So let's talk about how we do that properly. We begin with a visual inspection of the tires, and your tire inspection is probably best performed the night before you go on the ride. What you want to do is you want to check for rips, gouges, obviously anything that's poking out or protruding out of your tires, slashes, thread, wire that's showing, anything that's like, man, my tire is really worn. You also want to look for uneven wear of the surface of your tires, much like you would look at the alignment of your car. If you're running tubeless, you want to make sure that you don't have any sealant or anything seeping out. And obviously, we want to make sure that we check the tire pressure right before the ride, make sure that our tires are holding air. Next, we've got to check the health of our chain. And again, this is one of those things that you're going to do before every ride. I actually did a video on how to clean and lube your chain. I'll post a link to that in the description. I just run my fingers along the inside of the chain just to check the viscosity of the lube that's on there. Make sure that it's not too dry, not too gummy, and also want to make sure that it's not too watery to where it's not actually doing the job that it's designed to do, which is to keep the chain properly lubricated so that my drivetrain is working efficiently. And that brings us to the third and final check that you perform before every single ride, and that's just to make sure that your brakes are grabbing and releasing properly. I know, ironic, isn't it? Simply spin your wheel, apply the brakes, and spin the wheel again. It's that simple. And if you have any situation where you have sticky brakes, you have a bent rotor or anything like that, those things will present themselves with that simple inspection. Now we come to checks that we have to perform every 1 to 2 weeks. Now, if you're putting in like 250, 300 plus miles every week, or even more than that, you need to be doing this every week. If you're like me, where you're barely getting 70 to 100 miles in a week, you're okay with it too. You can even probably stretch it out to about every 3 weeks. And that's to check the wear on your chain. Now, the obvious way to do it is to have the tool, which is the chain checker, to make sure that your chain is not too stretched out. But there's another way to kind of like visually do it without the tool, and that's to check to make sure that your chain is seating properly on the chain ring. You'll actually hear it if it's not when you're riding and when you're shifting gears. And lastly, these are the safety and performance checks that you've got to be on top of at least once a month. And again, if you're riding on a regular schedule, and to me that would be like you're putting in about 125 to about 300 miles a week, you need to be performing these checks every month, okay? First one being checking the health and the adjustment of your headset bearing. That can not only be a performance issue, but also a safety issue. Also, your wheel bearings, huge potential safety issue. And lastly, we're going to talk about how to check your bottom bracket bearings. Now, in these, it's not so much about whether or not your bearings are worn out or not. These checks are to make sure that the preload on the bearings are properly set up. We're going to begin with the headset bearings. Simply make sure that your bike is on a flat, stable surface. Then apply the front brake, and while the brake is applied, rock the bike back and forth. If your headset bearings are not properly adjusted, you will see the top cap for your headsets moving, visually moving, or you'll hear some sound coming from there. Now, you will get a little bit of movement from your bike. That's to be expected because you're applying force to it, but you should not get a click, 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 or where you can actually visually see the top cap for your headset moving back and forth. And if you're in a situation where you're getting significant movement from your headset bearing or your top cap, it may not mean that the bearings are worn out. It just means that the preload needs to be properly adjusted. Take that to your mechanic if you do not know exactly how to do that. Up next is checking our wheel bearings. Now, your wheels really take a beating on rides because not only are they spinning going forward, but they're getting a lot of load put through them. Every time you go through a corner or you hit a bump or something like that, they're basically getting abused. Not to mention if you're riding in inclement weather where water is getting in there. But the way that you check the preload or the fitness is to simply place your hand on the top of your wheel or the tire and simply rock it back and forth from side to side. Now, you may get a little bit of movement, but you should not get like a click back and forth, and you should not get significant movement. If you're getting either one of those, it means either your bearings are completely shot, they're worn out, or it means that the preload in them was set so poorly that now you have worn out bearings. So that's one that you definitely have to make sure that you take it to a competent mechanic right away to make sure that that gets serviced properly. Yeah, worn out bearings aren't just a safety issue, but they're also going to have a tremendous effect on the performance of your bike if that preload is not set right and if your bearings are worn out. And the last and final check that we do on a monthly basis with our bike is to make sure that the bearings in our bottom bracket, again, that the preload or the health of the bearings is sound. And the best way to do that is to step over to the non-drive side of your bike, place the non-drive crank arm parallel to the chainstay, cup both items simultaneously in your hand, and simply do a squeeze test. You may see a little bit of flex or a little bit of movement, but if you get clicks and significant movements, it means that your bottom bracket is either very poorly adjusted or very worn out. And if that's the case, where you're getting significant movement or clicks, you've got to make sure that you get that item serviced as soon as possible. And for good measure, I also step over to the drive side and I perform the same thing just to make sure. Sometimes bearings could be more worn on one side, or as they've gotten worn, it could be that it's just in a very stationary position on the non-drive side. So I'd go over to the drive side and I'd perform the same check. All right, so that's my contribution to the world, making sure that your bike is safe and sound for you to not only ride safely, but to be able to get the maximum performance out of your bike. So if you'd like to see more of this type of content, make sure that you let us know in the comment section below. And while you're at it, also let us know about some of the checks and your maintenance interval schedule for those items on your bike. And so thank you for watching this video. Thank you for continuing to watch and support the channel, for sharing, liking, commenting. We're going to continue to do what we've been doing, which is to continue to put out cycling content that we believe instructs, informs, inspires. And that's what we do here. All right, guys, be blessed.